The Providence Municipal Court had handled numerous standard speeding citations, yet the morning of Tuesday, December 12th, would mark the occasion when Judge Frank Caprio encountered an individual who had previously shielded the United States President from possible attackers. As a sharply attired African-American gentleman stepped into the courtroom with the distinct demeanor of a federal agent, his quiet assurance and instinctive placement close to the doorway sparked a realization that would reveal one of the most sorrowful family crises ever witnessed in municipal court. The events that followed created the most moving courtroom experience in Judge Caprio's 40 years on the bench, demonstrating that occasionally those who have served their nation at the highest echelons endure the most crushing personal struggles quietly. But before we explore this remarkable account, and I require you to do this immediately, hit that subscribe button as we are quickly approaching 600,000 subscribers and 97% of viewers have not subscribed. Welcome to Judge Stories. If this narrative alters your perspective on sacrifice, duty, and the true essence of safeguarding those you cherish most, leave a comment and inform us, because after this 20-minute video, you will comprehend why this ex-Secret Service agent's disclosure prompted Judge Caprio to violate his own courtroom protocols and take an action unprecedented in his 4 decades as a judge. Here is my question for you. Comment right now. What would you be willing to give up to rescue a loved one? Because this man's sacrifices for his son will truly shatter your heart, while simultaneously renewing your belief in humanity. But before I reveal what Judge Caprio learned, I must pose a question and ask you to comment your response below. When you observe someone who exudes complete authority, do you ponder the hidden struggles they have endured? Remember that, as this story will transform all your assumptions about quiet resilience. Tuesday morning in Providence Municipal Court had fallen into its usual routine. Judge Frank Caprio, currently 80 years old, had overseen innumerable traffic offenses, parking conflicts, and minor violations. The audience contained a typical assortment of anxious motorists, irritated travelers, and individuals hoping the judge's renowned empathy would apply to their situations. At 9:32 a.m., as David Thompson entered through the courtroom doors, the atmosphere changed subtly. He was a man in his early 50s, standing precisely 6 feet tall, with graying hair at his temples and a stance indicative of years in military and federal service. His dark suit was impeccably ironed. His shoes shone brilliantly, and he moved with the smooth alertness of someone long trained to monitor gatherings for dangers. Yet it was not his professional look that drew Judge Caprio's notice. It was something else, more discreet. The manner in which David's gaze scanned the courtroom's entry and exit points, the deliberate placement he selected in the audience area providing him unobstructed views to every doorway, the instinctive manner he maintained, his hands unoccupied and prepared. These were the patterns of an individual schooled in protective services. The remaining accused observed him as well, although they couldn't fully express what set him apart. "Appears to be federal agent," one person murmured. "Likely law enforcement," another opinion offered. Yet David Thompson remained seated with quiet poise, his hands clasped, his focus politely fixed on the courtroom activities, revealing none of the apprehension that appeared to trouble all the others awaiting their case hearings. Court Recorder Margaret Walsh, who had been chronicling Judge Caprio's proceedings for 18 years, jotted a remark regarding the exceptionally collected accused. Based on her background, individuals confronting significant allegations typically displayed some indication of strain, restless movements, quiet conversations with associates, anxiously looking at mobile devices. David Thompson exhibited none of these traits. He maintained the enduring calm of a person familiar with extended periods of quiet observation when bail officer Martinez announced the case at 10:15 in the morning. The State of Rhode Island against David Michael Thompson. Case identifier 2024 MV9847. Speeding violation of school area. David rose with formal exactness. His motion was so deliberate and practiced that it instantly attracted Judge Caprio's experienced attention. "Kindly provide your name for the official record," Judge Caprio stated, initiating the customary process that had become automatic throughout 40 years of judicial work. "David Michael Thompson, Your Honor," he responded. His tone conveyed the balanced assurance of someone used to enunciating precisely in demanding situations, with merely a hint of a Chicago inflection that hinted at Midwestern origins. "Mr. Thompson, as per the violation notice, you were moving at 45 miles per hour within a 25-mile-per-hour school zone on November 28th, around 2:47 in the afternoon. What is your plea regarding this accusation?" "Guilty, Your Honor," David stated without pause. "I was driving too fast and I accept complete accountability for my conduct." The direct confession astonished some spectators who had anticipated someone with David's evident occupational history to dispute the ticket or ask for legal counsel. However, Judge Caprio identified the reaction of an individual who embraced responsibility without justification. "Mr. Thompson, could you describe the situation that resulted in this infraction?" David paused for the initial time, and Judge Caprio noticed something shift across his controlled demeanor. Not resistance or annoyance, but something resembling managed urgency. "Your Honor, I was hurrying to get to my son at his educational institution. I had gotten a communication from the head administrator stating that there was a critical matter needing my prompt attendance. Now, we're reaching the core of the narrative. And if you're discovering this as engaging as I am, press that like button immediately, since it assists us in distributing to share these amazing moments with more viewers. But here is what I am curious about. Tell me in the comments, have you ever violated the law to assist your child? Because the explanation for David's speeding is going to uncover something that will stun Judge Caprio and everyone present in that courtroom. Judge Caprio moved forward a little. Urgent circumstances concerning kids frequently offered perspective that greatly altered his view of traffic offenses. However, something in David's manner indicated there was far more to this incident than a basic school issue. "Mr. Thompson, what sort of critical circumstance made you drive fast through a school area?" David's jaw clenched very slightly, and Judge Caprio noticed the faint indication of restrained feeling. For an individual with David's clear professional background, any noticeable response implied the matter was very grave. "Your Honor, my son has been dealing with serious depression and anxiety. The principal phoned to tell me he had written what looked like a suicide letter, and they were worried about his immediate well-being." The courtroom became totally quiet. This was not a standard traffic ticket case. This was a father rushing to stop his child's suicide. David Thompson looked straight at Judge Caprio, and in that instant of eye contact, something meaningful changed in the courtroom environment. The judge observed not merely the composed professionalism of a federal agent, but the genuine anguish of a parent who had seen his child's fight with mental health issues. "Your Honor," David stated with quiet respect, "I worked on the Presidential Protective Team for President Barack Obama for 6 years, from 2009 to 2015. The disclosure struck the courtroom like a thunderbolt. Barack Obama, still one of the most admired and esteemed personalities in American politics, had been guarded by the man now facing Judge Caprio for a speeding ticket. Every individual in the audience instantly realized they were observing something remarkable. Judge Caprio's eyes opened wide with realization and something close to wonder. This was not just any person charged. This was someone who had genuinely risked his life daily for 6 years to safeguard the President of the United States. All right? I need all of you watching to stop and consider this. Comment below. Did you anticipate this development? Because what David discloses next regarding his period protecting President Obama is going to entirely reshape this whole narrative. And if you are not subscribed yet, what could you possibly be waiting for? Press that subscribe button. Since Judge Stories is recording the most unbelievable courtroom incidents in American history, Mr. Thompson, Judge Caprio said, his voice adopting a tone of profound esteem, when you mention you served on President Obama's protective detail, what specifically was your duty? I was a member of the counter-assault team for 6 years, Your Honor. I was in charge of eliminating dangers to the president during public events, travel, safety, and home security at the White House and additional protected sites. The audience broke into hushed discussions. Individuals were taking out their mobile devices, certainly looking for pictures from Obama's time in office, questioning whether they might notice David Thompson behind the scenes in formal photographs. Judge Caprio himself was grasping the significance of having a person with such a distinguished service history in his court. Mr. Thompson, are you presently working with the Secret Service? No, Your Honor. I concluded my federal employment in 2015. And what was the reason you departed from the Secret Service, if I may inquire? David remained silent for an extended period, and Judge Caprio observed him struggling with how much private detail to reveal in an open courtroom. When he eventually answered, his tone held the gravity of a choice that had transformed everything. Your Honor, my boy was identified with serious clinical depression and an anxiety condition when he turned 12. The requirements of my role with the Secret Service, the journeys, the extended shifts, the confidentiality rules that stopped me from talking about my job made it progressively harder for me to be the dad he required. Judge Caprio felt a shiver of understanding. David Thompson had given up one of the most esteemed jobs in federal law enforcement to look after his psychologically unwell child. Reflective, Mr. Thompson. That must have been an extremely tough choice. Yes, Your Honor. But my son mattered more than my profession. I was able to guard the President of the United States, but I could not shield my own child from his depression. I understood that the sole method to support him was to be consistently involved in his life. Judge Caprio was starting to comprehend the complete extent of David Thompson's sacrifice. Secret Service officers assigned to presidential teams usually had profitable opportunities after government service in private safety or business security. Leaving that field to care for a depressed child demonstrated a degree of parental commitment that was both motivating and tragic. And how has your son been doing since you departed from the service? David's composed demeanor finally softened a bit, and Judge Caprio noticed a genuine feeling this man had been bearing for a long time. It has been a challenge, Your Honor. Certain periods are more positive than others. He has experienced numerous hospital stays, various medicine changes, and continuous counseling. The shift from being the Secret Service agent's child to having a dad who was completely available was beneficial temporarily, but depression is an unyielding foe. This is where the account becomes truly devastating, and I require you to respond below. Are you acquainted with someone who battles depression? Because what David reveals to Judge Caprio next regarding his son's latest emergency will help you realize why this traffic offense case is actually about a parent's intense love. Mr. Thompson, you indicated that you were driving fast to get to your son due to a suicide letter. Can you explain what occurred that day? David inhaled deeply, and Judge Caprio observed him choosing to reveal one of his life's most agonizing experiences to an entire courtroom of unfamiliar faces. Your Honor, my son had appeared to be improving lately. He was going to school consistently, joining in certain events, and had even discussed applying to colleges. However, depression can be misleading. On November 28th, His English teacher discovered a letter my son had composed that seemed to be a farewell message. What was written in the letter? It expressed that he was exhausted from feeling like a weight, that he believed he could never measure up to being the child of a person who had worked for the president. He wrote that everybody anticipated him being as resilient and controlled as his dad, but he felt fragile and shattered each day. The court was now utterly quiet. Aside from the noise of individuals softly weeping, Judge Caprio himself sensed tears approaching as he considered the heartbreaking paradox of David's circumstances. "Your Honor," David went on, "my son wrote that he understood I had abandoned my profession to look after him, and that the remorse from that decision was intensifying his depression. He stated he believed everyone would be happier if he were no longer alive to be a problem." Judge Caprio understood. He was observing one of the most brutal paradoxes conceivable. David Thompson had given up his distinguished career to rescue his son, yet that exact sacrifice had turned into a component of his son's shame and harmful thinking. "Mr. Thompson, when you got the phone call from the school, what thoughts crossed your mind?" "Fear, Your Honor. Complete fear. I had spent 6 years ready to shield President Obama with my life, yet nothing in my preparation equipped me for the chance that I could lose my son to his own thoughts. I entered my vehicle and sped as quickly as possible, because I understood that each second might determine survival or not." Judge Caprio was now completely absorbed in David's account, the traffic violation that had brought him to court overlooked. In light of this far more significant human story, and when you reached the school he was living, Your Honor, the school counselor had been speaking with him, and they had persuaded him to stay until I got there. But witnessing him seated there so vulnerable and shattered, realizing that my affection for him had in some way contributed to his suffering, it was the most difficult experience of my life. Judge Caprio recognized that David Thompson symbolized something deep regarding duty and selflessness. This man had safeguarded the head of the free world, yet his most significant struggle was occurring in his own household against a foe that could not be defeated with strategic preparation or safety measures. And what followed would demonstrate that occasionally the individuals who appear the most resilient are enduring the toughest fights, because David was going to disclose something that would enable Judge Caprio to grasp that this situation involved far more than simple traffic infractions or even psychological conditions. Judge Caprio reclined in his seat, contemplating the serious implications of the testimony. David Thompson was not merely another individual with a traffic offense. He was a person torn between his former self as an individual who had worked at the most senior echelons of public service and his current reality as a parent battling to preserve his child's well-being. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Caprio stated thoughtfully, "I must pose a question, and I want you to understand. I am inquiring not in my capacity as a magistrate adjudicating a traffic matter, but as a person attempting to grasp a complete picture of your circumstances. How are you providing for your family after your departure from the Secret Service?" The inquiry carried deeper significance than it seemed. Judge Caprio had realized that a person with David's experience could attain substantial earnings in the private security field, yet the responsibilities of attending to a child with mental health challenges could restrict those possibilities. "Your Honor, I am presently employed as a security advisor for minor enterprises and individual patrons. The compensation is considerably lower than my previous government salary, but it affords me the adaptability to be present whenever my son requires assistance." "And how considerable is that reduction, if you are willing to share?" David paused, visibly uneasy about revealing his monetary details openly. Yet the judge's sincere interest prompted him to respond truthfully, approximately 70% less, Your Honor. My income decreased from about $95,000 per year with comprehensive government benefits to nearly $28,000 annually without medical coverage. The court attendees received this revelation in quiet astonishment. David Thompson had relinquished close to $70,000 in yearly earnings to support his son struggling with depression. Okay, pause for a moment and genuinely consider this. Respond in the comments section. Would you sacrifice $70,000 each year to assist your child? Because what David discloses next regarding the monetary burden of his son's psychological care will demonstrate precisely the extent one father was prepared to forfeit. And if this narrative affects you on an emotional level, press the like button forcefully, as accounts such as this are the very reason for Judge Story's presence. Mr. Thompson, with that substantial decrease in earnings, how do you handle your son's health care costs? It is a perpetual challenge, Your Honor. Psychological care is costly, particularly without insurance. My son has monthly appointments with a psychiatrist at $200 per visit, weekly sessions with a counselor at $120 each, and his pharmaceutical treatments run about $400 monthly. That totals over $1,000 every month solely for his fundamental mental health needs. Judge Caprio performed a swift calculation. David was utilizing almost half his entire monthly earnings for his son's psychological treatment. Considerable, Mr. Thompson. That is nearly 40% of your total income dedicated only to medical costs. How do you accommodate housing, nourishment, and other essential living expenses? We have been compelled to make compromises. Your Honor, we relocated from our residence in Washington, D.C. to a modest rental unit here in Providence to lower everyday expenses. I operate a vehicle that is 15 years old. We purchase goods at bargain shops and accept nutritional support when required. However, my child's medical care is not up for discussion. Judge Caprio was starting to grasp the complete view of David Thompson's existence after departing from the Secret Service. This individual had transitioned from the peak of Federal Protective Service to finding it hard to cover basic needs, all to guarantee his son obtained the psychological treatment he required. Mr. Thompson, on the day you were driving fast to get to your son at the educational institution, could you have paid for the mental health emergency assistance he possibly required? David's expression shadowed with an anguish beyond verbal description. Unfortunate? No, Your Honor. That contributed to why the circumstance felt so hopeless. If my son had required urgent psychological inpatient care, I lacked the funds to cover it. I was hurrying to the school, not only to preserve his life, but also realizing that I might not be able to afford the expert assistance he would require. The harsh contradiction was evident to everyone present in the court. A man who had committed his professional life to safeguarding others was economically incapable of safeguarding his own offspring during a psychological emergency. Mr. Thompson, what occurred after you got to the school that day? The school advisor had succeeded in calming the immediate emergency, but she suggested that my son be assessed at the hospital's urgent care department. I understood that would probably lead to a mental health detention, which our household could not afford, but I also understood that his existence was more critical than our monetary condition. Reflective. Did you bring him to the medical center? Yes, Your Honor. He was placed under a 72-hour psychiatric observation. The entire expense came to $8,400, which I clearly could not pay immediately. The medical facility consented to an installment arrangement that obligates me to pay $350 each month for the upcoming 24 months. Judge Caprio understood that David Thompson was now spending over $1,350 monthly for his son's psychological health treatment, exceeding half his entire earnings. This is what truly shatters my spirit regarding this account, and I want you to respond below. Do you believe our medical system is letting down households such as David's?
Because what he reveals to Judge Caprio next regarding the unworkable decisions he confronts will help you see why this traffic fine symbolizes far more than a driving infraction. Mr.
Thompson, with these monetary responsibilities, how do you handle regular living costs? We do not handle effectively, Your Honor. There are periods when I must decide between my son's counseling appointments and food supplies.
There are times when I work extra hours providing protection for community functions, simply to manage his prescription expenses.
And there are moments when I question if he would have been in a better situation if I had remained with the Secret Service and made sufficient income to afford the top mental health services obtainable. Judge Caprio felt his heart aching for this man who was doubting the most altruistic choice of his existence. Mr. Thompson, do you have regrets about exiting the Secret Service? David remained silent for an extended period, and when he finally spoke, his tone conveyed both certainty and sorrow. No, Your Honor. My son required my presence more than he required my wealth. But I do lament that we exist in a society where a parent must decide between being there for their child and having the means to pay for their child's health care. Judge Caprio understood he was witnessing a systemic breakdown that extended well beyond personal situations. David Thompson symbolized numerous households caught between the necessity to give care and the monetary incapacity to pay for that care. Mr. Thompson, on the day you were issued the speeding citation following your son's emergency, what was your emotional condition when you discovered you had been fined for a traffic offense? David's restrained demeanor broke entirely for the first time. Truthfully, Your Honor, it seemed like the last straw. I had just completed 3 days at the hospital with my son, worrying how I would cover his treatment. And then I found out I was confronting a penalty that I simply could not pay. The citation was $195, and I understood that cash would need to be taken from another part of our already strained finances. Judge Caprio now grasped that this was not truly concerning a speeding ticket. This was about a flawed system that fined individuals for attempting to preserve their children's lives and then penalized them again for the financial fallout of that despair. And the subsequent events would demonstrate that occasionally justice demands more than adhering strictly to regulations. Because Judge Caprio was preparing to take an action that would transform David Thompson's existence and renew his belief that individuals still existed who recognized the distinction between legal formalities and human need. Judge Caprio rose gradually, leaving his judicial seat, to speak to David Thompson face to face. The gesture caused a wave of astonishment through the courtroom. In 40 years of city court sessions, Judge Caprio seldom departed from his formal role to communicate with defendants on their level. Mr. Thompson, Judge Caprio, started, his voice bearing the ethical gravity that had earned him renown. In 4 decades on this bench, I have never faced a situation that so clearly demonstrates both the finest of human character and the most flawed of our institutional breakdowns. The judge moved around his bench, coming near David at the defendant's stand. Every individual in the courtroom was silent as Judge Caprio got ready to speak, not merely about a traffic offense, but a deep ethical dilemma. Let me explain what I observe when I view you, Mr. Thompson. I see a person who dedicated 6 years prepared to sacrifice for his nation. I see a parent who surrendered economic stability, career status, and professional growth to be available for his psychologically unwell child. And I see an individual who is being penalized by a structure that ought to be assisting him.
David's controlled exterior at last started to falter, and Judge Caprio could perceive the emotional burden that years of difficult decisions and monetary strain had placed on this devoted father.
Before I share what Judge Caprio does next, I need every person viewing to post a comment immediately. When was the most recent occasion you witnessed a person in power defend what is genuinely correct rather than merely what is strictly lawful? Because the upcoming events will give you goosebumps and renew your belief in fairness. But first, press that subscribe button since Judge Stories is approaching 600,000 subscribers and we are recording the instances that demonstrate humanity still remains within our judicial system. Mr. Thompson, I want you to understand that your decision to prioritize your son's welfare over your job progression embodies all that is good about being a dad. In a society where numerous parents value their occupational achievements above their children's requirements, you made an alternative choice. You selected selflessness over standing, being there over prominence. Judge Caprio's voice was growing louder with ethical certainty, conveying the fervor that had made his courtroom renowned for instances of deep human compassion. But beyond that, I want all individuals in this court to comprehend what we are truly observing here.
We are observing a dad who has provided all he possesses to maintain his son living and is being punished for the despair that caused him to drive fast while hurrying to avert a suicide.
The judge turned to face the audience, speaking not only to David, but to all attendees. Mr. Thompson, you were driving rapidly in a school area because you were attempting to get to your child before he ended his own life. You were not speeding to earn cash or evade duty or for your own ease. You were rushing to preserve the life of the individual you cherish most on earth. Judge Caprio walked back toward his platform, but rather than ascending the stairs, he halted and looked straight at David. Mr. Thompson, concerning the speeding offense that brought you to my court today, every charge is dropped, every fee is canceled, every sanction is erased from your history. The courtroom broke into unprompted clapping. But Judge Caprio had more to say. But more importantly, he went on, lifting his hand for quiet. I wish to speak about the broader unfairness that this situation exemplifies. Judge Caprio's face turned more solemn and his voice assumed the power of an individual who had spent years observing the meeting point of legislation and human necessity. Mr. Thompson, you have dedicated years safeguarding our country's top position. And now you are finding it hard to pay for fundamental psychological care for your son. That signifies an ethical breakdown of our community that extends well beyond traffic offenses. The judge stopped, selecting his terms with the exact care of someone who recognized the significance of his position. I am going to take an action that I seldom take in traffic court. I am going to compose a letter to our state's Mental Health Services Division, explaining your circumstances and asking for urgent support for your family's psychological wellness expenses. David Thompson's eyes welled up with tears for the first time since he had come into the court. After struggling by himself for years, a person with genuine power was at last acknowledging the unmanageable predicament his family was in. This is the instant that will truly shatter your heart.
Share your thoughts below. Have you ever witnessed this depth of empathy from a judge? Because what Judge Caprio states next will be referenced in government lessons for years ahead.
Moreover, Judge Caprio declared, I myself will reach out to nearby mental health groups to check if we can create a fund to assist families such as yours. Families where mothers and fathers have given up their professions to look after psychologically unwell children. Judge Caprio's voice now held the complete force of his ethical power. Mr. Thompson, I need you to grasp something. Your choice to depart from the Secret Service to look after your son makes you a champion, not a disappointment. Your readiness to give up your earnings to be there for his mental health emergency makes you precisely the type of dad every kid should have. The judge addressed David directly, but made certain his message reached all present in the courtroom. Your son is dealing with depression, but he possessed something that numerous depressed young individuals lack: a father who has demonstrated by deeds, not merely speech, that his kid's existence means more than everything else on earth. Judge Caprio faced the audience one last time. Everyone, we exist in a community that professes to cherish family and psychological wellness, but then builds structures that make mothers and fathers decide between being available for their kids and having the means to pay for their kids' health care. David Thompson should not need to make that decision, and his traffic citation should not be there because his frantic rush to rescue his son's life should not have been required. The clapping started once more, but now it was continuous and heartfelt. Individuals were rising not only to display admiration for Judge Caprio's statements, but to recognize David Thompson's sacrifice and the systemic unfairness he symbolized. And what Judge Caprio did next would guarantee that David Thompson's account turned into a trigger for actual transformation in how the community aids families experiencing mental health emergencies. Judge Caprio went back to his desk, but prior to taking his seat, he delivered one last remark that would be recalled by all there and circulated through online networks as an illustration of fairness that goes beyond legal details. Mr. Thompson, I wish to give you my word. Your story does not conclude with this canceled citation. I will ensure that individuals comprehend what genuine sacrifice appears like. I will ensure that your son understands his father as a hero. And I will ensure that other households confronting comparable battles realize they are not by themselves. David Thompson ultimately collapsed entirely. Months of suppressed emotion, flowing through tears that symbolized years of hardship, dedication, and affection. The individual who had confronted presidential threats was overwhelmed by the basic acknowledgement that a person grasped his unworkable circumstances. If you are not feeling emotional at this moment, you should verify your pulse, because this is precisely the reason Judge Stories is here. This is why we record these amazing instances of human bravery and judicial empathy. And if this account has touched you, you definitely need to subscribe to our channel immediately, because we are capturing the most crucial courtroom events that demonstrate justice and humanity can still exist together. Judge Caprio's tone gentled as he spoke to David directly. Mr. Thompson, when your son inquires one day why you abandoned your distinguished profession to care for him, you can say this: you decided to be the type of father who appears when his child requires him. You decided to be the type of person who cherishes being there over status, and you decided to show through deeds that your affection for him is more powerful than any career goal. The judge's message extended past the immediate legal matters, addressing broader issues about parental duty and community assistance. Your work for President Obama was respectable and significant, but your work for your son is courageous and unmatched. Anyone can study protective methods and safety procedures, but not everyone can learn the sort of unselfish love that causes a father to sacrifice all for his child's welfare. Judge Caprio gazed at the audience one last time. I wish everyone present to recall David Thompson's experience. I wish you to recall that heroes do not always have uniforms or carry identification. Occasionally, heroes wear professional attire and hold several part-time positions to afford their children's treatment. Occasionally, heroes abandon $70,000 incomes to be available when their children require it most.
As David got ready to exit the courtroom, multiple individuals came to him with proposals of aid and encouragement. A nearby psychiatrist handed him her card, proposing to give appointments at a lower cost.
A woman from the audience introduced herself as a social worker and proposed to assist with accessing mental health support systems. But here is the most amazing result of this account, and I want you to write below about this. Within 14 days of this courtroom event,
Judge Caprio's communication to the state mental health agency led to David's family being granted urgent mental health support that paid for 80% of his son's care expenses.
A local news outlet covered the story, and public contributions flooded in to aid with the leftover costs. A mental health support group provided David a job as a family connection expert, employment that compensated sufficiently to sustain his family while enabling him to assist other parents dealing with comparable emergencies. Most critically, David's son started to get much better. Understanding that his father's selfless act had been acknowledged and backed by others eased a great deal of the shame feeding his depressive state. He subsequently sent a note to Judge Caprio stating, "You did more than throw out my father's citation. You assisted in preserving my life by demonstrating that his affection for me was a source of pride, not remorse."
David Thompson came back to the courthouse after half a year, not as someone charged, but to inform Judge Caprio about his son's recovery and express gratitude for sparking the assistance that changed their existence.
Here is the key lesson from this remarkable account. David Thompson demonstrated that genuine bravery does not always involve spectacular deeds. Occasionally, it involves silent, steady devotion. He revealed that individuals who protect our nation in the most significant roles are also mothers and fathers coping with the identical difficulties we all encounter. And he proved that the most crucial safeguard we can offer is not for leaders or famous people, but for our own kids. If this account moved you, if it caused you to reconsider sacrifice and psychological wellness aid, then you must take 3 steps immediately.
First, click that subscribe button, since Judge Stories is recording the instances that confirm our judicial structure can still display empathy.
Second, send this video to a person who must realize that asking for support for mental health indicates fortitude, not frailty. And third, write a response underneath and inform us, do you believe our culture provides sufficient support to households managing mental health emergencies? As David got ready to exit the court, multiple individuals came to him with proposals of aid and encouragement. A nearby mental health doctor gave him her contact details, proposing to conduct meetings at a lower cost. A lady from the audience introduced herself as a caseworker and proposed to assist in accessing mental health support systems. But here is the most astonishing result of this narrative, and I want you to reply below regarding this. In just 14 days following this court event,
Judge Caprio's communication to the state mental health agency led to David's household getting authorized for urgent mental health support that paid for 80% of his son's care expenses. A regional news outlet reported the story, and public contributions flooded in to handle the rest of the costs. A mental health support group presented David with a job as a family support coordinator.
Employment that provided sufficient income to sustain his family while enabling him to aid other parents facing comparable struggles. Most critically, David's son started to get much better. Realizing that his father's devotion had been appreciated and encouraged by the public helped relieve much of the culpability that had been powering his depression. He later composed a message to Judge Caprio writing, "You did not merely cancel my dad's fine, you contributed to saving my existence by revealing to me that his love for me was something to honor, not feel ashamed about." David Thompson came back to the courtroom after half a year, not as someone accused, but to inform Judge Caprio about his son's development and to express gratitude for initiating the assistance that changed their existence. This is the key message from this remarkable account. David Thompson demonstrated that real bravery does not always involve grand gestures. Occasionally, it consists of silent, steady self-denial. He revealed that individuals who protect our nation at the top echelons are also mothers and fathers coping with the identical difficulties everyone encounters. And he illustrated that the most crucial safeguarding we can offer is not for leaders or famous personalities, but for our own offspring. If this narrative moved you, if it caused you to reconsider sacrifice and psychological wellness assistance, then you must perform 3 actions immediately.
First, press that subscribe button since Judge Stories is recording the instances that demonstrate our judicial framework can still exhibit empathy.
Second, send this video to a person who must realize that asking for support for mental well-being indicates fortitude, not frailty. And third, write a comment underneath and inform us, in your opinion, does our community provide sufficient aid to households managing psychological health emergencies?